Today we are talking about a racing game that released in 2006 for the PlayStation 2, which, kind of already makes this game interesting before you even boot it up, because 2006 is quite late for a PS2 game. Not like middle of the generation late, but the PS3 is kind of already here late. By this point, developers had spent years figuring out the PS2's quirks, squeezing every ounce of performance out of it, and in the year of 2006, on multiple platforms we got games like Test Drive Unlimited, Need for Speed Carbon, Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, and the Cars tie-in video game, all of which were pretty good looking games. And as well as being good looking, they were good games. And then we have Urban Extreme, a game that looks at all of those games and says, what if we made a racing game with 4 tracks, and then made them look exactly the same? Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. And yes, the Worst Racing Game series is back with its first episode in 2026, with a fittingly quite bad game called Urban Extreme, which if I had to describe it in 2 words, I would probably say it's extremely urban. So before we get into the gameplay of this, game, if we can call it that, let's go into some history about the game first. So this game was developed by Data Design Interactive, a developer notorious with awful quality games. Somehow last year I only covered one of their games, and that was the absolutely awful Action Girls Racing. And you'll see a lot of the flavour of Action Girls Racing, which released a year prior, in Urban Extreme. The way the AI behaves, the UI layout, everything. It's almost like a copy-paste, but looks slightly less ugly. Anyway, it was published by Metro 3D and released in June of 2006 exclusively on the PlayStation 2. Urban Extreme came out at a time when racing games were either going open world, getting extremely cinematic, or leaning heavily into realism, or doing all of the above. Test Drive Unlimited also released in 2006, which gave you Hawaii to drive around. Meanwhile, Urban Extreme gives you 4 generic city tracks, all built around the same extremely urban concept. Sorry, I'm going to keep saying extremely urban, because the pun is very intentional. The game is called Urban Extreme, and it commits to that word with such intensity that it forgets that cities usually have variety, and sometimes green spaces. The maps in Urban Extreme are just skyscrapers, flat buildings, concrete overpasses, construction sites. That's it. It's basically the whole aesthetic. If you shuffled footage of all 4 tracks together and told me it was one very long circuit, I would 100% believe you without question. And I would be very surprised if any of you are able to distinguish the tracks apart from the footage being shown. So yeah, let's talk about those tracks, because that's one of the biggest issues with this game. There are only 4 of them, they're not 4 different cities, not 4 different regions, just 4 tracks set within the same indescript city that doesn't actually have a name. I mean, I guess we can just call the city Urban Extreme Land or something. Anyway, they all share the same visual identity to the point where distinguishing them becomes genuinely difficult. They're all grey, flat, lifeless, and surrounded by copy-paste urban scenery. There's no sense of place, no landmarks that stick in your mind, and no, oh yeah, this is the good track. It's just constantly, this is the bad place. It feels less like racing through a city and more like racing through a construction company's very generic screensaver. The layouts themselves aren't even offensively bad, they are just there. Long straights, sharp corners, some awkward elevation changes that don't feel intentional, and enough obstacles on the later tracks, so like the 3rd and 4th ones, to ensure you'll crash quite often. Which leads nicely into the handling. Urban Extreme's handling model is impressive in the sense that it covers a wide range of terrible. The handling varies from, oh this is unpleasant, to this car should not legally exist. Most of the vehicles feel either wildly oversensitive or completely unresponsive, with almost no middle ground. But hey, at least that's different from Action Girls Racing because all they drove was the same smart car. Steering inputs often feel delayed, then overcorrected, which is a fantastic combination when you're racing inches away from concrete walls, signs, and parked vehicles. And because the tracks can be quite narrow and fairly obstacle heavy, any mistake immediately turns into a violent crash. Except, in my experience, for one single car. That's right guys, that's how stretched for content this game is. I'm having to do a segment on one single car in the game. The 4x4 off-road vehicle that you start with is, without any exaggeration here, the only car in the game that feels remotely usable. It actually grips the road, it doesn't randomly fishtail, or at least it doesn't do it very often, and it doesn't explode the moment you look at a barrier funny. And this is why the majority of my gameplay footage that you are seeing is in this particular car. Not because I love it, but because it's the only car that allowed me to actually play the full game to make the review. Every other vehicle feels like it's fighting you at all times. I'll put some footage up for you to see how many times I crash the other cars.
Where did you learn to drive?
Some of them oversteer into oblivion, understeer straight into walls, or bounce violently off of minor bumps like they've hit a landmine, which makes progression incredibly frustrating because the car selection is very limited and somewhat questionable. Urban Extreme has a very limited selection of cars, and what's here isn't exactly exciting. You've got a handful of street cars like a taxi, a sedan, later on a hot rod for some reason. There's a beach buggy, a couple of off-road vehicles like a rally car, and the aforementioned 4x4, and then that's kind of it. And I need to point this out because it genuinely made me laugh. The beach buggy is literally just called Beach Bug. Not buggy, just bug. Which feels less like a vehicle name and more like a placeholder someone forgot to perhaps change. Visually though, the cars are okay. They're not offensively ugly, but they're definitely not impressive for 2006. The models, to me at least, have this weirdly nostalgic early 2000s look to them, like something you'd see in a budget PC racer from like 5 years beforehand. They are serviceable, but nothing about them stands out, which is a problem when unlocking cars is basically the main form of progression. Oh, and whilst I'm quickly talking about the cars, the hot rod for some reason has a really comedic horn, and the AI whenever it uses it feels the need to just blast it constantly. It's so annoying. So just how many game modes does Urban Extreme treat you to? Well, Urban Extreme offers exactly 2 game modes, a single race and a time trial. That's it. No championships, no career ladder, no events with modifiers or variety, and time trial is treated as practice, which makes sense, but it also highlights how bare bones the whole experience is. You use time trial to learn the track, all 4 of them, and then single races where you earn the money. And that's the entire loop, guys. I'm not even joking. There is literally nothing to do in this game except 4 single races and 4 single time trials, with a possibility of like 8 different cars. Ridiculous. Now, on paper, the progression in Urban Extreme sounds absolutely miserable. Here's how it works. Winning a race earns you $55, coming second earns you $45, and third $35, and then you come any lower than that, then tough luck buddy, no money for you. Unlocking all the cars requires $1,650, but crashing badly enough causes your car to explode, and every explosion costs you $10, which doesn't sound like much until you realise how often you explode. With the game's physics and handling, crashing isn't just common, it's pretty much inevitable. Tight corners, awkward hitboxes, unpredictable steering, it all adds up, so you're constantly losing money while trying to earn it, hence why I stuck with the 4x4. Now, here's the weird part. Despite how bad this sounds, unlocking everything only took me like 2 hours, because once you reach the required amount of money for a car, you don't actually have to spend the money or lose the money to get the car, it just unlocks. So it's basically just like an XP bar, but disguised as dollars. Which is a blessing really, because I would have hated to have got to the $1,000 mark, unlock the next car, lose all the money, then have to grind back up to $1,650. So that's good at least. So 2 hours isn't long, but when you're playing this game it does feel long, because you're doing the same races on the same tracks, with the same visual scenery, and for the sake of actually earning the money, in the same car, over and over again. There's no sense of momentum, no escalation, no new environments to look forward to. It's not a long grind, it's just an insanely, boringly repetitive one. Now, I touched on the visuals for the car models, but let's talk about the rest of it. So visually, Urban Extreme is, well, to put it nicely, quite dull. The environments are flat, they're grey, and respectfully they are very lifeless. There's very little environmental detail, and almost nothing happening in the background to make the city feel alive. There's no crowds, no dynamic elements, no planes flying over, there's like no atmosphere. It just feels like racing through an abandoned industrial zone at like all times. And while the PS2 wasn't exactly a powerhouse, this is 2006 and games were doing far more impressive things visually by this point. As I mentioned, the cars themselves are probably the best looking part of the game, and even then, okay is about as generous as I could possibly be. There is, however, one visual element that clearly received attention. I honestly wouldn't be surprised that a significant portion of Urban Extreme's budget went into the 3D rendered PS2 controller in the controls menu. And I mean that sarcastically, but also kinda not at the same time, because the controller model actually looks kinda good, rendered and rotating it in 3D, showing you which buttons do what. Like, that's a pretty cool touch, and I think that's probably the nicest thing I can possibly say about this game, is that it shows you the controls on a 3D rendered PS2 controller. Congratulations to Data Design Interactive, you've finally done something right in my eyes, you rendered a controller. Congrats. Oh, and the sound design doesn't really leave much of an impression either. The engine noises are generic, the crashes are loud and abrupt, music exists, but you won't really remember it. Nothing's offensively bad in terms of the sound, it's just incredibly generic and forgettable. Which honestly sums up most of Urban Extreme as a whole. So how did the game fare in its critical response? Well, I simply couldn't tell you. There is like not a single review out there that I could possibly find, except for one from a PlayStation magazine that says it's in there, but the actual review appears to have been lost to time because no one's logged it online. But if I had to guess, it probably didn't review very well, if it did at all. Interestingly enough, Urban Extreme actually did go on to get a sequel called Urban Extreme Street Rage on the Nintendo Wii, which I think is just absolutely criminal. I haven't looked into it at all, but I'm going to assume it was probably developed by Data Design Interactive as well, and was just another budget pile of garbage. Anyway, so now the time has come to rank Urban Extreme on our worst racing games tier list. Oh boy, the first ranking of 2026. How very exciting. Could you maybe guess where I'm going to put this one? So, Action Girls Racing, which was developed a year before by the same company, ended up in Pure Evil. And Urban Extreme will be joining its sister of Action Racing, because it is not good, guys, it's really not. There's nothing of value here, there's no content, the physics are whack, the AI is whack, the visuals are kinda whack, there's just nothing redeemable about the game, except a 3D rendered PS2 controller, but I'm not gonna let that affect the ranking of a racing game, so... I want you to take a look at the game on screen now and answer this question. When do you think this game released? I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. Well, if your answer wasn't 2006, well then you were wrong, because yes, this game came out in 2006. So then, let's get started. So, London Cab Challenge is, on paper, a very simple but kinda good idea. You play as a London taxi driver, you pick up passengers, you drive them to their destination within a set time limit, and then you earn money. Upgrade your cab, repeat until either the game ends, or your patience does instead. Conceptually, it's drawing from a very obvious source, Crazy Taxi, minus everything that made Crazy Taxi energetic, responsive, visually readable, or like, you know, fun. In theory, it's not the worst pitch in the world, an open-ish city, time driving challenges, light progression through vehicle upgrades. This is the skeleton of something that could, at the very least, function. But London Cab Challenge, my friends, does not function. What Phoenix Games has done here is take the absolute minimum viable interpretation of that Crazy Taxi idea, and then somehow still miss.
It's like someone described a video game to a development team over a very poor phone connection, and the development team only heard every third word that was said, so we just ended up with Taxi, without the crazy. Before we go any further, it's worth talking about Phoenix Games as an entity, because London Cab Challenge, as I'm sure you may know, does not exist in isolation. This is part of a pattern. Phoenix Games specialised in budget titles, often released at rock-bottom prices, frequently featuring misleading cover art, familiar sounding names, and just enough surface level resemblance to popular games to trick a casual buying parent for their child. These weren't passion projects, they weren't experiments, they were just products engineered to occupy shelf space at a low price. When people talk about shovelware, this is what they actually mean, not a game I didn't like, but software whose primary goal is to exist cheaply and briefly before being forgotten. But the thing with London Cab Challenge is it's pure Phoenix Games, but it's like the worst of their lineup. It's so rushed, it's bare bones, it's uninterested in being good. It feels less like a video game and more like, well, torture. If you're watching this video and you're a developer or have an interest in game development, hit me up, let's make a good London Taxi game, because I have played 2 of these things now and they've both been horrible. On paper, it should not be that difficult to make a Crazy Taxi inspired London cab driving game. I mean, I'd rather play Taxi Chaos than this. That's just unbelievable. So let's start with the visuals, because they are the first thing that hits you, and they set expectations immediately. Expectations that the game then somehow fails to meet anyway. This is a PlayStation 2 game, released on hardware capable of running games like Gran Turismo 4, Shadow of the Colossus, and Metal Gear Solid. London Cab Challenge looks like it would struggle to justify its existence on the original PlayStation. Just on a side note, I'm currently working on a playthrough of Project Gotham Racing 3, as a launch title for the 360 that came out in 2005, and that game looks 100 million times better than this ever could. I know that's not fair comparing platforms, but I literally went from playing Project Gotham, turned it off, and then moved on to this, and it was just so jarring. Anyway, the taxi model is astonishingly bad. It barely resembles a car. It looks more like a hovercraft from the back, and sometimes when the camera tilts a bit you can see 2 wheels kind of functioning at the front. Anyway, the proportions are wrong, the textures are horrible, and the whole thing just looks like it's kind of floating. It's very weird. In fact, the taxi model is so bad, I went to bed later that day after playing, had a nightmare about the regular show Taxi, except that Taxi was in fact the one from this horrible video game.
Hello, Governor. Holy crap, it's real!
London itself fares no better. Landmarks are either missing, kind of unrecognisable, or represented by abstract blobs that technically occupy space, but have no purpose. The city feels less like London, and more like a collection of unrelated roads, kind of thrown together in confusion. What's truly impressive, in a perverse kind of way, is how aggressively the game clips about. Objects clip constantly, cars can pass through each other, sometimes you can just fall into parts of the environment, and all of this is happening despite the fact that there is almost nothing on screen most of the time. 2 or 3 blurry textures, a handful of cars, and yet the engine still feels constantly overwhelmed. It's like watching someone trip over in an empty room full of nothing. The thing is as well, I'm not sure if this was an emulator issue or the game, but every time I'd complete a mission or do something purposeful, there'd be occasional texture glitches and flashes on screen, which you will see in the footage. Even if it is an emulation problem, I'm still blaming the game because this is horrible. This, guys, is the game that broke me. The core gameplay loop is exactly as uninspired as you'd expect. An arrow appears on screen, you follow it to pick up a passenger, then you follow that arrow to the destination, and repeat. The best part is, the passengers aren't even modelled in, they're just arrows on the pavement. Same with the destinations, there's nothing actually meaningful about half these destinations, they're just empty spaces with arrows on. And the arrow that does guide you is so close to the car, it's actually really distracting and quite hard to drive with. Speaking of driving the cab itself feels unpleasant. The handling is loose and inconsistent. It's kind of like the physics engine, if you could even call it that, is making it up as it goes along. Sometimes the cab turns too sharply, sometimes it barely responds, and collisions are basically a lottery which you'll probably never win. Hit a wall, maybe you'll bounce off, maybe you'll stop dead, maybe you'll clip halfway through it and become briefly fused with the environment. Who can say? Not me. The collision detection consistently defies basic physics. You can slam into objects at full speed and barely slow down, or gently brush against a curb and come to a complete halt. And on top of this, the collision detection setup for other vehicles is absolutely horrible. You could definitely be passing a vehicle with, not much space, but enough space that you wouldn't touch it, and your car will still bounce off of, well, thin air, I guess. Now, just quickly before we move on, if you're new around here, then please consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping the bell to stay up to date with my future uploads. It's all greatly appreciated, and whilst you're at it, if you haven't hit that like button, then please consider doing so. It really helps out more than you probably think. Anyway, let's talk about the traffic. Traffic AI is where things truly unravel. Cars will randomly stop in the middle of the road for literally no reason. Not at intersections like they're taking a junction, not for pedestrians because there aren't any, they simply decide that's just where they're gonna park. Other vehicles, for most of the time, seem completely unaware of your existence, drifting lazily into your path or clipping directly through you. There's no attempt here at believable traffic behaviour. It doesn't feel like traffic, it just feels like a collection of moving props that occasionally even forget that they're supposed to move. Now, in theory, London Cab Challenge includes a progression system. You earn money from the passengers you drop off, which you can then spend on upgrades like better suspension or a more powerful engine. In practice, this system is kind of meaningless. The differences between upgraded and default vehicles are pretty much non-existent. Handling does not noticeably improve, performance gains like speed are minimal at best. It feels like the upgrades exist purely because someone decided that a game like this was supposed to have upgrades to give the player something to work toward. The best part is, the place where you have to take your car to get upgraded, or well, a garage I suppose, they're not actually really distinguishable from looking like a garage, it's just another floating green sign like an arrow. The game shows you where the first one is and then tells you that you have to find the rest, but I can tell you after quite a while of playing this game, I did not find a single other garage. I'm sure they just forgot to code it in, to be honest with you. So rather than adding any depth, the system just completely wastes your time, forcing you through menus that obscure the screen and interrupt what little flow the game manages to have in the first place. I mean, hey, at least the soundtrack is alright. It's exactly what you'd expect. It's a repetitive electronic theme that sounds like it was pulled straight from a low-end keyboard demo mode. It loops endlessly, offering no variation and no personality, but it's generic as they come, and I guess it serves its purpose. The sound effects as well, they're functional, I guess, in the loosest possible sense. The engine noise exists, the collisions make noises, none of it feels grounded or satisfying. It's audio that, I guess, fulfills its role, but it doesn't actually contribute anything to the overall experience. And when you pause the game to check the map, the engine noise just keeps playing infinitely, which is really annoying. One of the strangest things about London Cab Challenge is not just that it's bad, but that it feels unfinished in a way that suggests to me that nobody ever intended to finish it properly. There's a hollowness to the experience that goes beyond that low budget. Plenty of low-budget games manage to feel cohesive. This does not. The city is large enough to imply openness, but empty enough to discourage exploration. Roads exist, but they don't really go anywhere. I was never curious about what was around the next corner. because the game teaches you in your first 2 minutes that the answer to that question is absolutely nothing of interest. There are no side activities, no optional challenges, no secrets, no sense that the world exists independently of the arrow telling you where to go. I mean, hey, at least that other horrible London taxi game had collectibles to find to an extent and different unlockable cars. I don't know, guys, it just feels like a prototype that shipped accidentally and we all just kind of went along with it. Every fare in London Cab Challenge is functionally identical. You pick up the floating arrow pretending to be a passenger, you drive to the destination with nothing exciting at the end, beat the timer, which is very forgiving, get paid, repeat. There's no narrative framing, not even any interesting passenger dialogue, no escalating difficulty curve, the timer is the only source of tension, and even that doesn't really do its job. In better games, timed challenges force you to master mechanics or shortcuts. Here they just expose how unreliable the mechanics are. Losing time because of your own mistakes feels fair in these games. Losing time because traffic AI froze in the middle of the road or I bounced from car to car because of poor collision detection just feels insulting. And this happens, like, all the time. There is no sense of accomplishment when you drop off a passenger. No feedback beyond a number going up. The game doesn't celebrate success because it doesn't really seem to care whether you succeed or not because you've already paid the low price for entry. Okay, I can't take any more of this game, so let's rank London Cab Challenge. There is literally no other tier for this game other than Pure Evil, and whilst we're at it, it's going right at the back of Pure Evil because this is probably my least favourite game we've covered in this series. Yeah, Burnout Legends was rough and offended me because I love Burnout, but oh man, this game is fucking horrible. I did not enjoy a single second of it. Ironically, unironically, in any way whatsoever, this game haunts me in my sleep. It's horrible. I cannot recommend to anyone for any reason to check out this game. The only part of this game that you need to see is what I've shown you in this video, and hopefully you will never have to see it ever again. Also, as this was a 2006 PS2 game, there's basically no reviews, no sales information, or anything. So, thankfully it seems that the world has mostly forgotten about London Cab Challenge. London Cab Challenge is not just one of the worst games on the PlayStation 2, it's also one of the most unnecessary. It does not fail spectacularly, it just fails quietly, wasting potential, time, and somebody's shelf space. Well, it's finally happening. The worst racing game. For the last 8 to 9 months of this series ongoing, I have had numerous requests for big rigs. It's been on the wheel. I once accidentally said it was on the PS2 and like 100 of you told me it wasn't. And thank you for correcting me because I am stupid.
I am stupid. I am stupid.
So just for 1 week we're not going to use the wheel and we are just going to play big rigs, talk about it, rank it, and move on. So first of all, obviously, we've got to talk about the history of big rigs over the road racing. So Big Rigs was developed by Stellar Stone and released in 2003 exclusively for PCs. The game's packaging states that the objective is to race over US truck routes to be the first to deliver cargo, and to avoid being arrested, even though the game features no police or law enforcement of any kind, so that's already a great start. Now, supposedly, the developer of this game, Stellar Stone, actually ended up outsourcing their work to Eastern Europe, so they didn't really do any of the work themselves. But anyway, now we've covered that, let's actually talk about the game. So the version of the game that you are seeing today is the very recent re-release that came out on Steam in April last year. That version includes both the original game and what they describe as an enhanced version, although at the end of the day, garbage is still garbage, enhanced or not, but we will get to that a bit later on. So I paid a grand total of about 79 pence to buy this game from Loaded, because I didn't even want to pay the $4.99 to buy it from Steam itself. So when you open it up, there's a launcher that opens, and then eventually you can get to the main menu of the original Big Rigs, which looks absolutely awful. The logo is gross, the menu is gross, there's like no options at all aside from graphic settings, and the only two graphic settings you get are between low and normal. There's no high, but does that surprise you at all? No. You can then choose Custom Race or Random Race. Random Race does exactly what it says on the tin. It gives you a random truck on a random map, and away you go. Custom Race allows you to choose your truck and choose your track, offering you the freedom of choice. Okay, so now you've selected your truck, you've selected your track, and the game has loaded. And away you go. Your opponent will not move, and you are free to go about your day and win the race. So, handling wise, your controls are as follows. You move forward by pressing the forward arrow key, you move left and right by pressing the left and right arrow keys, and you brake by using the down arrow key. Very complicated stuff. That's quite literally all there is to it. You can't do anything else. Between the four trucks, the handling model and how they drive does not change whatsoever. They all feel exactly the same. They all turn very stiffly, they all accelerate very slowly, and they all brake very slowly as well. They are trucks at the end of the day, so, you know, hey, it's kind of accurate, maybe. But what isn't accurate is how the trucks can literally drive through everything. This game has zero collision detection, none whatsoever, so you can just drive through checkpoints, buildings, other trucks, bridges you can't even drive over, you just go under them and come back out on the other side. There is zero collision detection in this world except for the very basic foundations of the world. On top of this, slopes and inclines will not affect your speed either negatively or positively. No matter where you're going, you can go up a mountain, you will maintain the same speed, your truck will not be affected, there is zero gravity. You are permanently stuck on the ground. No matter how fast you go off the top of a hill, you will just stick to it and go right back down the other side. Very strange. I was halfway through editing this video when I realised saying zero gravity would make no sense because the truck would be floating away, so what I mean to say is that the gravity is incredibly strong and the truck cannot leave the ground. Oh, and by the way, they never actually coded a limit for your reverse speed, so if you just press down and hold it, you will just reverse and your speed will infinitely keep increasing. It is absolutely ridiculous. You can just leave the map and drive into nothing and just keep reversing and keep going until the game basically breaks. Now, in terms of visuals, Big Rigs look like it was assembled from spare parts found in the discount bin of a 1998 game engine. The environments are vast, empty wastelands populated by buildings, which of course you can drive straight through, and bridges that do not believe in collision detection. The textures stretch, they smear and repeat endlessly, and parts of the road just pop in and out of existence at any given moment. There are times where you drive through entire cities, in inverted commas, and they appear to be abandoned not just by people, but by the concept of any effort. It's less of an open world and more of an open wound. The trucks themselves are big, shiny, and just kind of disconnected from the ground. Your rig just glides along the road like it's late for an appointment with destiny, unaffected by gravity, friction, or like any common sense. Basically, the game doesn't look very good, which I'm sure you probably figured out for yourself after watching this video for about 5 seconds. So if you thought visually the game was pretty bad, well, I've got some news for you because the audio design, well, it isn't exactly much better. Big Rigs features music and sound effects, technically, but in reality it just kind of features noise. The engine sounds loop endlessly, creating this audio equivalent of being trapped in an elevator, but not with elevator music, no, there's just some guy in there making some horrible noises, trying to imitate a truck. There is no sense of acceleration, no feedback, no roar of power, just a flat, unchanging hum that slowly erodes your will to live. The music, when it actually decides to play, is just basically royalty-free background audio accidentally left on during a PowerPoint presentation. It doesn't react to gameplay because the gameplay itself is pretty confused about what's going on at any given time. Honestly, if for some reason you want to check this game out for comedic meme purposes, just put it on mute. You'll be doing yourself a favour. The level design isn't exactly great either. Each map in Big Rigs represents a stretch of highway that looks like it was drawn by someone who has heard of America but never seen it. The roads twist, turn, and occasionally just kind of stop. As I mentioned, every building looks abandoned, the hillscapes look janky as anything and you can climb up them no matter what, and there are checkpoints but they don't really matter. There's routes to follow, but it's kind of optional. The game gives you a destination, but doesn't really care how you get there. But now let's talk about the most notorious thing about this game, because when you do win, and you will win, well, you're greeted with a screen that says, "Your winner," as in U''RE winner. Not you win, not you're a winner, just your winner. And I know most of you will have heard this 100 times before because this has been solidified into meme racing game culture, but my god, come on guys, this is ridiculous. The thing with Big Rigs is, for me, there's not really much that I can add to this very large conversation that's already occurred around this game. There's so many videos, so many news articles, reviews, that have all said varying versions of the same thing, is that it's a horrible game, it's not technically a game, it's just this meme experience. So I can't really add much new. The bottom line is, this is dog shit. So yeah, Big Rigs is remembered. Not because it was good, not because it was fun, but because in a way it was kind of honest. Big Rigs is what happens when a game ships in a state so unfinished that it accidentally becomes art. It is studied, recorded, streamed, laughed at, because it represents the absolute bottom of the barrel, but finds a way to dig deeper. It's not just a bad racing game, it's a monument to broken games, missing quality control, and the belief that no one will notice. Well, guys, we did notice. A lot. In fact, we noticed to the point where the game's critical response, I think, is one of the lowest of all time for a video game. On Metacritic, the review score for this game is 6 out of 100. I have a feeling that may be one of the lowest reviewed games of all time. It is certainly the lowest reviewed racing game of all time. The user score, whilst there are obviously some that are kind of, haha, funny, this game is good, is still only 4.3 out of 10. Ironically, the Steam reviews are positive, but again, if you actually read them, it's all just pure irony. Now, just a comment before we rank this game, the Steam re-release did come with some bonus features, where it featured some cars. That's right, cars as well as Big Rigs. And with those cars came collision detection for some reason. They just decided to add that in so that you could actually collide with the houses, the other vehicle, which now moves by the way, and the terrain around you. Kind of impressive, I guess, but still the bare minimum. The reason for the bonus features with the cars is because of a game called Midnight Race Club Supercharged, which is once again from Stellar Stone, and it's basically the less fun re-release of Big Rigs, where the game added cars and bikes, and that collision detection system which I mentioned. So now the time has come to rank Big Rigs over the road racing on our worst racing games tier list. Now, of course, I couldn't give Big Rigs any of the categories we already had. It had to have its own thing right at the bottom. So introducing the Your Winner category that Big Rigs and only Big Rigs will be in for the rest of time. Now, as well as this, I have actually updated the tier list a little bit so that the games in each of their categories have also been ranked from best to worst in my opinion. So you'll see in the top of Actually Not That Bad, where Need for Speed Carbon did sit, is now Road Trip Adventure, because that was my favourite game in that tier list. So going from the left to the right, left being my favourite, right being my least favourite. And that same logic applies for all the other tiers as well. Now, of course, no one in their right mind could ever recommend Big Rigs over the road racing to, like, anyone, other than maybe a torture method. It is not enjoyable in the traditional sense, it's not functional, it's definitely not complete, but it is kind of fascinating. It's a game that teaches us all quite an important lesson, I think. Sometimes failure is so total, so uncompromising, so confident in its wrongness that that failure becomes immortal. Big Rigs never reached the finish line because it drove backwards off the map at infinite speed, but somehow it still won and remains kind of relevant.
Climb into your comfiest tracksuit, dust off your best Cockney rhyming slang, and prepare to shout "Core Blimey Governor" at an inanimate object.
Hello, Governor. Holy crap, it's real!
Because today we're taking a trip into the cultural heart of my home, England. And by cultural heart, I of course mean a budget PlayStation 2 racing game released in 2006 that pretty much nobody remembers. And with good reason. So buckle up, get your taxi meter running, and for the love of God, don't touch the curb. So London Taxi Rushour begins, as many PS2 games do, with a loading screen. Not a particularly interesting loading screen, mind you, just the usual static imagery while the console quietly questions its life choices and as to why you've inserted this disc inside it. But it eventually gives way to the title screen proper. And it's here where the game makes its first bold statement, and that statement being, "We are not going to impress you." A lineup of colourful characters stare back at you, all of whom look less like people and more like rejected mascots for a third-tier car insurance company. They're smiling way too much, and that's the kind of smile that suggests they know something you don't, and that knowledge is deeply unpleasant. This is also where you encounter the game's greatest crime. That's Rush Hour, all one word. Every time I say it, a small part of me dies. Rush Hour is 2 words, 2 perfectly good words, separating them was free, and yet here we are. The second problem becomes apparent almost immediately as well. The very concept of this game is fundamentally broken. A taxi in London at rush hour. That's not so much escapism as it is masochism. You don't need a video game to recreate that experience, you can just simply sit in a warm metal box and stare angrily at brake lights and set fire to money in your own home. The immersion is basically identical. I live in a city and never ever on my drive home from work have I ever thought, I'd love to recreate this experience of sitting in traffic at home in a video game.
You have to seize the goddamn gap. People are so goddamn inefficient. Oh, god damn it!
Before we get driving, London Taxi Rush Hour offers a small selection of menus and options. They exist, and that's about all you can say for them. There's a tutorial, where I use the term tutorial very loosely. It's less a learning experience and more an instruction manual that someone read aloud to you while you weren't listening. And then again, we have that 3D rendered PS2 controller, which I was praising very highly in Urban Extreme. So I guess they just made the model once and just put it in all their games, so I retract that nicety about that. Anyway, then we have the game modes. There's time games, which is make as much money as possible within a set time limit, so like kind of classic Crazy Taxi. Money games, which is reach a target amount of cash with no time limit, and Perfect Day, which is no time limit, no money limit, and just vibes, really. Perfect Day sounds idyllic, doesn't it? Maybe it will let me drive around London not in rush hour on like a quiet Sunday, but sadly, that does not happen. Instead, it's the mode you'll spend most of your time in if you're trying to unlock everything, because it's the least punishing way to grind collectibles without losing the will to live. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of racing games, or in this case, terrible bargain bin racing games, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. And whilst you're at it, if you want to support the channel any further, then please check out my Patreon using the link in the description below. Over on my Patreon you can get access to cool goodies like early access to videos and your name in the credits of every single upload. And at the moment there's even a discount which is in the pinned comment down below, so a perfect time to check it out. Anyway, enough selling myself to you, let's go on a London taxi journey. So for today's journey, I'll be playing as Andy, because unlocking characters in this game is an ordeal, and honestly, life is too short. Andy is a man with a face permanently locked into what I can only describe as the DreamWorks eyebrow expression. he looks like he's constantly reacting to something mildly impressive. But there's no voice acting in London Taxi Rush Hour, but in my head, I would say Andy sounds exactly like Jason Statham doing his strongest hardman impression while chewing gravel. Andy drives a standard Hackney-style cab, no gimmicks, no flair, just a box on wheels with dreams of violence. Here he is at the start of his shift, ready to kick ass and deliver passengers, and unfortunately for passengers, he's all out of ass. So now it's time for the big reveal. Is London Taxi Rush Hour a Crazy Taxi inspired game, or is it actually just Crazy Taxi? Well, let's not dance around it. Of course it's just Crazy Taxi. It's not inspired by it, it's not influenced by it. It is Crazy Taxi, just filtered through a budget lens and relocated to a city famous for congestion, narrow streets, and soul-crushing traffic. You drive like a lunatic, you pick up passengers, you deliver them as fast as possible, you ignore traffic laws, physics, and common decency. The similarities are not subtle. The character select screen uses a near-identical bold font, destinations are marked with large green boxes, there are ramps attached to trucks for jumping, the entire game structure screams "we played Crazy Taxi once, wrote everything down, then came back to it a year later." I was genuinely shocked there wasn't a legally distinct knockoff of All I Want blaring through the speakers when I started driving. I mean, hey, at least Simpsons Road Rage had the audacity to be good. Instead, I provided my own soundtrack by yelling "yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah" every time I picked up a fare. Come on, I wasn't going to sing for you guys.
Yeah, 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 yeah!
So the passengers in London Taxi Rush Hour are pretty easy to find. Why? Because they are the only pedestrians in the entire city. London, which is a city of like 9 million people, has apparently been reduced to about 12 individuals who all desperately need taxis at the same time. They appear on the minimap, stand perfectly still, and wait patiently for you to arrive. You can park next to them or directly on top of them, because they have no collision detection whatsoever. But before they'll get in, there's a catch. Your taxi has to be clean. Yes, cleanliness matters. As you plough through traffic, scrape walls, and cause vehicular chaos, your cab accumulates dirt. If it gets too filthy, passengers will refuse to enter, forcing you to collect cleaning power-ups scattered around the map. It's a neat idea, which is something Crazy Taxi actually didn't do. Unfortunately, it barely matters. Cleaning pickups are literally everywhere, and it takes an eternity for your taxi to become dirty enough for this to actually be a problem. The mechanic exists, it functions, and then it quietly excuses itself from relevance. Once a passenger is on board, they'll tell you where they want to go. Often it's a famous London landmark, Buckingham Palace, the Houses of Parliament, the Tate Gallery. Other times it's something far more vague, like the restaurant. Ah yes, London's single restaurant, renowned worldwide for serving, food. Is it the Ivy? Is it a kebab shop that only opens at 2 in the morning? Who knows? Andy decides that one. I don't even know how accurate the game's London is because I refuse to drive around the city. Mostly because my car's so old I'd have to pay to go in anyway, but also, walking is free, the tube isn't that expensive as far as I remember, so I just refuse to drive in there. Anyway, the driving in London Taxi Rush Hour is an exercise in controlled chaos. Traffic laws absolutely do not exist. The traffic lights are just there for pure decoration. Other drivers operate under a strict every vehicle for itself mantra. Cars mount pavements, buses ram you from behind and in front, to be honest. Everything is actively trying to kill you and each other. And honestly, that part is kind of fun for about 5 minutes. This is exactly how a game like this should feel, a polite tea-drinking version of Mad Max, where instead of gasoline wars, everyone is just late for something. Stopping next to a passenger can actually be impossible because a double-decker bus has just introduced itself to your rear bumper at top speed. It's not a complaint so much because this is probably what it's like being a taxi driver in London, but it can be quite infuriating. So let's talk about how the game looks, because it's not great, guys. The pop-in is quite aggressive, buildings appear suddenly like they've just remembered they were supposed to exist. The draw distance isn't great, it's like the horizon is more of a suggestion than a certainty. It's tempting to say this game looks like a PS1 title at times, but that's actually unfair to the PS1 because Gran Turismo was a thing. This feels more like an early PS2 game that never quite finished loading or finished development. There is somewhat of a vague charm to this low poly aesthetic, but I don't believe for a second it was remotely intentional. This is not Katamari Damacy, this is £7 worth of ambition. And whilst we're talking about disappointments, what about the gameplay loop? Well, the crazy taxi part, that's the game. Pick up passenger, drop off passenger, repeat. There's nothing wrong with that loop in principle. Taxi games live and die by how good the driving feels, but unfortunately, this is where London Taxi Rush Hour truly collapses. So yeah, handling. For a game about urgency, London Taxi Rush Hour feels weirdly slow. You never feel like you're truly building speed, and even when you are boosting, the camera zooms out to suggest you're going fast rather than actually delivering that feeling. Journeys are short, the crashes are frequent, and momentum is constantly interrupted. But the handling is just worse. At low speed, the taxi turns on a sixpence. At high speeds, it becomes both sluggish and hypersensitive, resulting in constant wobbling as you fight to maintain just a straight line. Using ramps is an act of faith, and drifting is just a blatant lie because it doesn't work. The handbrake doesn't let you power slide around corners, it mostly just stops you dead and rotates the car 90 degrees and sends you on your way like nothing ever happened. If drifting isn't fun in an arcade driving game, something has gone very incredibly, tragically wrong. But none of that is the worst part, because the real villain of this game isn't Andy himself, it's not the handling, it's not the traffic, it's the goddamn curbs. The curbs are fully modelled, they have collision detection, and they are evil. Sometimes you'll roll over them smoothly, very rarely. Sometimes they'll fling your taxi at a random angle like a roulette wheel of pain. Sometimes you'll get stuck on them entirely with wheels locked, forcing you to either follow the pavement or violently wrestle the dodgy steering. Driving on pavement should be encouraged in a game like this. Instead, it's a gamble every time you touch the edge of the road. If you removed the curbs, the game would instantly become a lot better. They don't ruin London Taxi Rush Hour, they define the entire experience. The game is built around these crappy curbs. To the game's credit, the landmarks are at least recognisable. The Houses of Parliament look like a chunky PS2 approximation of themselves, which I actually kind of enjoy. Not out of patriotism, don't get me wrong, but because they remind me of early 2000s games where everything looked like a cereal box. The Tate Gallery is here too, looking like the Tesco Value version of itself. Slightly off, but close enough that you know what it's meant to be. The map layout, as I said, I can't tell if it's properly accurate, but it seems decent enough. Someone clearly cared enough to get some of the planning mostly right, even if the buildings don't resemble reality much beyond the shape and the rough location. Another cool part is you can also drive into the tube. It's not particularly exciting, but it's a novelty shortcut complete with long, slow stairs and a couple of confused pedestrians that still want to be picked up by a taxi. Why are they in the tube waiting for a taxi? I don't know, who knows, but it's kind of funny. Now, interestingly, this game actually features collectibles and in turn unlockables. Scattered around the map are these bulldog tokens, and if you collect them you unlock characters. And there are a lot of these tokens, some are hidden cleverly, others require lining up jumps with the game's terrible handling. After quite a lot of playing, I unlocked exactly one new character. Her name is Stacy. She is alarmingly cheerful, her car is red, she drives exactly the same as Andy, and there are no meaningful differences between the characters, which makes the grind feel completely pointless. There are 4 characters overall, and each one has a different coloured car variant, which again, handles exactly the same. So there is no point in collecting these tokens and unlocking these characters whatsoever, because you'll have the exact same experience regardless of who you play as. Now, in terms of critical response, I found just one review for London Taxi Rush Hour, and this was from the official PlayStation 2 magazine UK, who gave it a 20 out of 100. And the user score for the game on Metacritic is about 4.5 out of 10, so not good either. Interestingly, the game did get released later on the Nintendo Wii, but I can only imagine that was 10 times worse because that would have had motion controls. So now the time has come to rank London Taxi Rush Hour within our worst racing games tier list. Now, the other 2 Data Design Interactive games have ended up in pure evil. Now, I will say that Rush Hour at least tries to do something a bit more different from the other 2 Data Design titles we've played. Yeah, it's a Crazy Taxi knockoff, but hey, They added the cleanliness thing, there were collectibles within the city. There was actually like a minimal amount of effort put in because they actually had the license for the London taxi. I don't know, it's still not great, but for me, I think I'm going to put this game in rubbish. It's not pure evil because there is some attempt to make a somewhat half-assed game, but it's still really bad, so it's going to be rubbish for me. So what do you guys think of London Taxi Rush Hour? Are you a fan? I really hope you're not, because it's not a good game. And would you rank it any differently? If you want to put it in pure evil, I honestly wouldn't even dispute that. Just for me, it's staying in rubbish.
Take a look at this game. Based on the visuals, when do you think this game came out? If you're thinking anytime during the 90s, well, you would be very wrong, because this game released, depending on where you lived in the world, between 2003 and 2004. This is Rascal Racers. Rascal Racers is a kart racer that boldly asks the question, what if Mario Kart, but worse in every possible way? This is a game so clunky, so ugly, and so inexplicably designed, it's garnered quite the reputation for itself. No multiplayer, sluggish controls, and graphics that look like they were assembled during my lunch break. But here's the thing, bad games, they don't just disappear, they linger, they get remembered. I mean, mostly through this series, and somehow Rascal Racers became one of the PS1's most infamous racing games. So today, we're gonna strap in, grab the worst kart on the grid, and find out once and for all, is Rascal Racers truly one of the worst racing games on the PlayStation and in general, or is it a misunderstood relic of the bargain bin era? So before we dive into the gameplay, let's just go over a little bit of history about the game. So of course, this is a kart racer. It was developed by a company called Miracle Designs and published by the notorious Midas Interactive. It released in Europe in 2003 and was published by Teddy Games in America in 2004. So just for reference, if you lived in Europe, this game came out 3 years into the lifespan of the PlayStation 2, and if you lived in America, that's 4 whole years into the PS2's lifespan. This is absolutely ridiculous. It wears its inspirations on its sleeve. Colourful animal characters, cartoonish tracks, goofy power-ups, basically everything you expect from a Mario Kart clone. But somewhere along the production line, it veered off into a wall and turned into, well, this. To sum it up in an analogy for you guys, if Mario Kart or Crash Team Racing is fine dining, Rascal Racers is a microwaved, pre-made dinner. Yeah, it technically fills you up, but you're probably not going to enjoy a single bite of it. And also it's kind of bad for you. So the basic hook is simple. Pick one of several animal racers, like Argyle the Aardvark or Paulie is what I assume to be a beaver, and race through 9 tracks split across 3 very creatively themed worlds. And I'm not joking here, these are the names: City, Forest, and Ice. Wow. That's crazy. You've got 3 different modes. Tournament, which is like your standard single-player Mario Kart experience. You work your way through cups, except there's only 3 of them. There's Arcade, which is just a single race, because who needs the structure? And lastly, there's Time Trial, where you're just racing the clock. But instead of just setting a best lap time, it's across 3 laps. So that's exciting, I guess. All these might feel familiar if you've played almost any other kart game pretty much ever made. But yeah, 3 game modes, no multiplayer. Really pushed the boat out there, didn't they? Now, before we go any further, if you are a fan of retro games, or terrible racing games in this case, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. And whilst you're at it, if you want to support the channel any further, then please check out my Patreon using the link in the description below. Over on my Patreon, you can get access to cool goodies like early access to Worst Racing Games episodes, and your name in the credits of every single upload. Anyway, that's enough selling myself to you, let's talk visuals. If you were expecting the PS1 at its artistic peak, like Crash Team Racing or Ridge Racer, well, my friend, you're in for a rude awakening. Rascal Racers looks kinda rough. Like, really kinda rough. Characters are blocky, the tracks have minimal detail, there's not really a sense of depth, it's just flat, choppy polygons that kind of make up a somewhat 3D world. It kind of feels like a tech demo that went wrong, and I think that's about the level we're dealing with here, and I don't think there's really any other way I could describe it. And before you ask, I don't think any of this was intentional retro style. This was 2003 or 4. The PS2 was in full swing. This is just something that was rushed out to fill shelf space. So let's move on to the audio. The soundtrack is overwhelmingly forgettable. Repetitive loops that sound like they were composed by someone who listened to some Nintendo tracks, forgot about them, and then waited a week and tried anyway. It really sounds like it's attempting that joy and whimsy of Nintendo music, but instead is just capturing despair and rage in the player. I don't know, there's nothing aggressively wrong with most of the songs, they're just very repetitive and very samey. The sound effects are also just meh, there's nothing great about them. It's best to just play this game turned down, I'm not gonna lie. Or in fact, it's best to just not play this game at all. But, you know, if you have a young child and you want to lull them to sleep, pop the game on loop, I'm sure they'll conk out quite quickly. So yeah, I've blasted the way the game looks and the characters, but what about the actual gameplay? Well, it ain't much better, guys. The gameplay feels like driving through glue. Steering lacks really any precision, and turns don't really respond like you'd expect them to, especially in a kart racer. Tight corners, just forget it, because you're going to crash into walls more often than not. However, thankfully it feels like the developers actually were aware of this, and the track design is intentionally not that difficult, so that you shouldn't be bouncing around too much. And yes, I know what you might be thinking, yeah, it's just old, but no, plenty of PS1 racers have tight responsive controls, like Crash Team Racing, Muppet Race Mania. Rascal Racers is just super clunky in comparison. Even the power-ups, they're just super generic, missiles, grenades, but you just like drop them down like landmines, it's really weird. It all feels pointless. You either get lucky and hit someone, or you watch them drift by like polite ghosts in a parade. It's not chaotic fun, it's just confusion, at best. There's just so many stupid design flaws in this game. Firstly, I can't believe how easy this game is. When you beat all 3 cups on the standard medium difficulty, you unlock hard mode. And it's not really hard anyway, it's exactly the same, it's just more of the same. Oh, and by the way, there's no way to save your progress. There's no memory card support. So if you win a few races, well, cool, you better be ready to do them all over again next time you boot up. Thankfully, and I'm not kidding here, it will literally take you half an hour to see all 9 tracks and unlock pretty much everything, so there's not really any reason to go back to it anyway. But that just seems like such a strange design flaw. How is there no memory card support? How can you not have a game that saves in the year of 2003 and 4? Now, usually, a lot of the games in this series end up having at least something redeemable. A so bad it's good charm, nostalgic value, or even like a cool mechanic. But to be honest, there's like nothing here, guys, at all. I'm sure there's mixed feelings of this game throughout the community. I'm sure some of you hate this game, but I'm sure maybe some of you played this as a kid and swear it as a childhood gem, and to that, fair enough. But the cold hard truth is, the game's lifespan is incredibly short. There's not enough tracks, there's no multiplayer, and to be honest, unlocking the 2 additional characters and the extra difficulty mode did not feel rewarding whatsoever. I would imagine that most of you would play a few races, sigh deeply, and probably never return. Unless you're a hardcore PS1 collector, there isn't really any point in owning this game whatsoever. I mean, hey, at least if you emulate it, you can use save states, so at least you can save the game. Now, in terms of critical response, there's basically no information to go off of. Of course, Cad Icarus played this game a long time ago and hated it, and rightfully so. But at the actual point of release, there's like no reviews that I could find. It doesn't have a Metascore, and it also doesn't even have a user score. I managed to find one single review, and that was through the website Moby Games, which linked me to a French news site that gave it a 26 out of 80. Very random score, but the bottom line is they didn't like it, so at least I'm not the only one. And of course, with this being a budget title releasing so late in towards the PlayStation 1's lifespan, there's like no sales figures for this game whatsoever, but I can only imagine and assume that this game sold absolutely horribly, or at least we can hope it did. Now, however, if you somehow still want to buy a physical copy of this game after watching this video, if you live in Europe and want a PAL copy of this game, well, lucky you, because you can pick up a still-in-box complete copy for about £3.50. However, if you live in America, a still-in-box copy is going to set you back about $65, or for my English friends, £48-ish. And these stats are from price charting. Anyway, so now the time has come to rank Rascal Racers in our worst racing games tier list. The thing with Rascal Racers is that it's not even offensively bad. It's not broken like some of the other games we've played in this series, like Action Girls Racing or Urban Extreme, but it's just so boring and so lacking of content that there's nothing there. You can't save, there's no multiplayer, it's just such a pointless game. So I think for me, Rascal Racers is going to join the hot garbage tier, alongside such classics as London Taxi Rush Hour and Super Street the Game. By some miracle, this is absolutely not the worst racing game that we've covered on this series, but this is certainly not good either. So is Rascal Racers worth your time? Well, only if you're a collecting completionist or a fan of weird little oddities. Otherwise, I would stick to the classics because your thumbs and your brain will most likely thank you for it.
What can go wrong with a racing game? Well, that's what I find myself asking pretty much every week. Limited tracks, bare bones tuning, terrible AI, clunky handling, outdated graphics. Well, there's a lot of answers here, and today we're going to be looking at one of those games that has pretty much all those things wrong with it. It's one of those mid-2000s European racing titles that tried to ride the street racing boom, but it showed up to the party several years too late. So let's take a trip back to 2005 and find out whether this forgotten racer deserves some redemption or just permanent exile from your mind. So before we dive into this game, we need context. 2005 wasn't really an easy time to release a street racing game. We were coming off the high of Need for Speed Underground and its bigger, flashier sequel, Underground 2, neon lights, open cities, licensed cars, deep tuning systems, you know the drill. And then you also had Midnight Club with its insane speed and arcade chaos, and then you'd also have Need for Speed Most Wanted, which pretty much redefined arcade racing again with cops, cinematic presentation, and a massive career mode. So if you were releasing a small budget racer in 2005, especially a street racer, you had two choices really. Compete on polish and features, or do something completely different. And Road to Fame tries kind of to do both, and doesn't really quite manage either. So the hook here is actually kind of interesting. Instead of licensed cars or tuner legends, Road to Fame gives you Eastern European compact cars. Well, just a few. We're talking about vehicles inspired by things like the Trabant, iconic socialist era machines that are about as far from a Nissan Skyline as you can possibly get. Don't get me wrong, there's also some other cars that are obviously based on real life ones, such as the Peugeot 206 and the Beetle. Now in theory that's pretty cool, it's rare to see those kind of socialist cars represented in games. There's a certain novelty in racing glorified plastic boxes on wheels around urban tracks. It's different, it could have been charming, but that novelty only carries you so far, and like I say, that's only a couple of the cars in the game. Road to Fame doesn't do enough to capitalise on that uniqueness. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of racing games, or in this case terrible racing games, if you haven't done so already then please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you're enjoying the video, please consider hitting that like button as well, it helps a lot more than you would think. Anyway, let's talk about the campaign, I guess you could call it. The main mode is a linear career progression made up of loosely connected race events. There's no open world, no rival system,
No dramatic storyline, no real sense of momentum. You just move from race to race, earning money, buying upgrades or new cars, and repeating the process. The structure feels a lot less like a road to fame and more like a checklist. There's very little narrative motivation, events are strung together without much flair. When you first boot the game up, you have a variety of cool and funky looking characters that are definitely very 2000s to choose from. They have very interesting names ranging from Jack Fat to Jack Black. Yes, Jack Black. But the problem is, these characters are also your rivals in the game and they don't really have any personalities outside of their pictures. No escalating drama, no stakes beyond just win the race. Compared to what other racing games were doing in 2005, this already feels dated. It honestly feels like something designed several years before, and it was just shelved for a few years before finally being released. So let's talk about the cars, because this is where the game at least tries to stand out a little bit. You start with humble, underpowered Eastern Bloc style compact vehicles. They're boxy, they're slow, and they look like they'd struggle merging onto a motorway. And that's kind of the joke. The game leans into their cheap, almost comically basic nature. You're not driving some Italian exotic hypercar, you're racing budget commuter cars that look like they were assembled with leftover fridge parts. There is a tuning system, where you can upgrade engines, you can adjust the visuals and repaint the body, but here's the problem. The tuning feels very shallow. You literally have about 5 different options of engine tuning to choose from, and you can't really adjust any of it yourself, you just buy it and the car suddenly goes a little bit faster. There's no deep mechanical simulation, no meaningful performance transformation. Most upgrades just feel incremental rather than transformative. In games like Underground 2, upgrading your car felt dramatic, like you were building something unique to you. Here it just feels like you're bolting on slightly shinier rubbish. Now we get to the big one. How does it actually drive? Well, not great. The handling sits in that uncomfortable middle ground between arcade and simulation, without fully committing to either. Cars feel floaty at times, but also strangely stiff. Turning doesn't feel sharp or responsive, drifting doesn't really work, and the grip levels feel inconsistent. For example, on some of the Eastern Bloc style cars, they all handled pretty well. The minute I bought the not Peugeot 206, I started spinning out like a Top Gear skit.
Maniac!
And when racing games get handling wrong, everything else kinda suffers. You can forgive mediocre graphics and a thin story, but if it doesn't feel good to drive, there's kind of a problem. The physics lack weight, collisions feel awkward, and sometimes the car reacts in ways that feels disconnected from player input. It's not completely broken, but it's never satisfying. Like the controls, for example. The controls are as simple as they come. You use the arrow keys to move, left shift is your handbrake turn, and the spacebar is your brake. You can remap those for those of you who prefer playing with the WASD keys, like myself, but that's about it. Obviously this is an early days PC game, there isn't really any controller support. Or of course, wheel support for that matter. The AI behaviour is another problem with this game. It ranges from boring to frustrating. In each race you'll usually have one guy that suddenly becomes god and drives off incredibly fast, you'll have a couple that drive okay, and you'll have one that's just a complete idiot that usually flips the car around every corner.
I am stupid. I am stupid.
The problem with the higher difficulty AI is that it cheats. It literally just cuts corners and goes on the grass, and it isn't affected by going over the curb or being on the grass at all. It maintains that same speed. I mean, hey, after a while I decided if you can't beat them, join them, but you shouldn't have to do that because the AI shouldn't be cheating around corners in the first place. And also, it's just classic early racing game AI that just doesn't have any acknowledgement of where you are, so if you happen to be driving in front of it on the racing line at a slower speed than it is, it won't go around you, it will just ram you from behind, where you either get a speed boost or you'll spin out and crash. You can drive a near perfect race and still watch an opponent magically keep pace ahead of you, or even worse, surge ahead at the last second in a way that feels scripted rather than earned. Difficulty spikes make progression oddly punishing, especially early on. Instead of gradually building skill and confidence, the game just throws you into races where the starting conditions feel stacked against you. After a couple of hours, this becomes less challenging and more irritating, and that's even if you can stomach playing this for a couple of hours. By 2005 standards, the visuals were already behind. The textures are muddy, environments lack detail, the car models are hilariously simplistic, lighting is flat. This isn't early 2000s charming low poly aesthetic, this is the we're several years late to the party visuals. When stacked against contemporary racers, it feels outdated. Same with the menus, they're functional but very uninspired, the UI design lacks personality, it's just serviceable, it's never impressive or exciting, or anything really. The game also includes some comic book style cutscenes that are meant to inject humour and personality into the experience. In theory, that's a pretty fun idea. In execution, they fall flat. The humour doesn't really land particularly well, and just kinda comes across as cringe, and instead of charming, they come off as low budget and tonally inconsistent. Rather than elevating the experience, they just add to the fact that this feels super budget and cheap. In terms of sound design, there's really nothing I can say about this game in its favour. The engine sounds lack any punch, the music is forgettable, ambient audio is minimal. There's nothing offensively bad here, it's just nothing memorable. And for a racing game, that's kind of disappointing. Sound is a huge part of immersion. The roar of an engine, the screech of tyres, the pulse of background music, these things actually matter. But here everything feels muted. And by default, the sounds are so incredibly low anyway, you can't really hear anything. Now, to be fair, the concept of racing some of these obscure cars is genuinely unique. There's a certain charm in seeing these machines customized with bright paint jobs and exaggerated upgrades. It's something different from the usual Ferrari and Lamborghini formula. And if you're someone who enjoys niche racing history, there is novelty here, but novelty alone can't carry a full game. Now, in terms of critical response, it was kinda hard to find any reviews for this game because this was a niche 2005 PC exclusive. However, there were a couple of German PC gaming outlets that did cover it and put it in the roughly 50% kind of area, which seems fair. So now the time has come to rank Road to Fame on our worst racing games tier list. This definitely isn't the worst racing game that I've ever played, it's definitely not the best, but they did what they could with probably what was a very low budget and a limited release. So for me, this game is going to sit in the hot garbage tier alongside classics such as London Taxi Rush Hour and Rascal Racers. There are parts of this game that at least function, but there's nothing really redeeming or fun, except watching the AI be a bit garbage. At the end of the day, Road to Fame isn't a broken disaster. It runs, it functions, you can complete it. Yeah, sure, it will probably crash a lot on modern hardware because this was from 2005, but it runs. It feels like a relic from an earlier era that just arrived too late. By 2005 standards, it was already outdated, and its one truly unique idea, focusing on those compact cars, wasn't supported by strong enough gameplay or enough car variety to make it memorable. In another timeline, maybe with more development time, this could have been a quirky cult classic. Instead, it's just nothing, really, other than maybe a curious artifact of the mid-2000s PC racing boom. And so that brings us to the end of our look at Road to Fame, and with it, this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. So let me know in the comments down below. Have you played Road to Fame? Are you gonna play it? And would you rank it any differently? Share all your thoughts below, and as always, if you have any suggestions that you want to see in this series, pop that in the comments as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thanks and goodbye.